Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Financial Advisors Want to Know podcast. I'm Catherine Tindall. I'm a CPA with Dominion Enterprise Services. We're a specialty tax and accounting firm that works for financial advisors. On today's episode, it's a podcast about podcasts. I have Mark Hansen on with me. Mark is a financial advisor and he runs a podcast called The Quiet Part. And I connected with him because I had seen some of his show and we connected on LinkedIn, and I was interested in having him come in and talk about his experiences with running a podcast and the successes he's had there. He has a niche with working with younger people, but I wanted to just talk all things podcast. So thanks for joining me today, Mark.
Oh, I will jump into a podcast about podcasts any day of the week. So love it.
We'll have to do a podcast about podcasts. That'll be my next episode for everyone listening.
Yes. Full podcast inception. I would love that.
So I guess to start from the beginning, can we just hear a little bit about your practice and what made you make the decision to get into podcasting?
Yes. So I work with younger people. I say I work with people in their 30s to help them spend the next 30 years preparing for their last 30 years. And what I noticed very quickly was there's important information, there's smart people, and sometimes there's a lack of action. And I was wondering, what is it that stands in the way of these smart people implementing this good advice, right? Assuming I'm giving them good advice. And I realized there's this quiet part, right? And it's the unspoken truths in our lives that get in the way of us starting to do things that even we know are really good for us. And so I started my podcast called The Quiet Part to try to tell people, I understand. I am literally in your shoes. I understand you've got a family, a spouse, a job, you stay at home, you've got kids, life is busy, but that doesn't mean that we want to stand still. That doesn't mean we want to leave the car and park. We actually do want to get going. And the podcast was just a great way to take stuff out of my world and put it into their world at their pace. That's why I specifically chose podcast over something like a blog or just leaning on social media posts.
Yeah, that's really smart. And so in terms of how you've framed the podcast, I really like that it's not, super directly like, here, I'm going to teach you how 529 plans work, because people don't really enjoy that content other than advisors who I think actually kind of like listening to stuff like that. What have you found in terms of because I think for a lot of people who are going to do podcasts, there's kind of two realms you can go in. You can go on the interview style like this one, or you can go on the I'm going to generate content and speak directly to an audience. What made you decide one way or the other? And do you do a mix of shows? And then in terms of content generation and content ideas, what's your process around that?
Content is typically coming out of my meetings. If multiple clients are asking me similar style questions, that's immediately a podcast episode. Like most recently, I've gotten questions about what does it look like to become a client at Second Comma? What happens first and then what happens next? And these are questions coming from very analytical people who, again, are busy and are willing to start a process, but they want to know what they're getting into. They want to know what the commitment is so they understand how to step from A to B to C. So now, boom, just recorded a podcast episode about this is what it looks like to go through the decision process of do you want to be a client with Second Comma? Other things, there's just general education. I've gotten some really good feedback about, hey, I released one episode and somebody came back and said, thank you for giving me a new framework on how to think about making financial decisions. And I really latched onto that. I love that. And then somebody else came and said the same thing. Somebody else came and said the same thing. And I realized, okay, people in my realm, people that I'm talking to are very hungry for what is a different way to think about this. And I can't teach anybody a new framework by saying, this is a 401k. This is an IRA. These are RMDs. I would never teach somebody a new framework by sticking there. But what I do is I teach a lot via metaphor or storytelling. And then I kind of do 30,000 foot view and then 10,000 and 5,000. We get down to, okay, this is what it looks like. This is how you do it. This is how you know you've done it. And people really enjoy that tactical framework there.
Yeah, that's really great. I really like that because I think I have a luxury of the fact that I work with advisors. Like they want to know how the pizza's made. But for a lot of advisors, they do not have that luxury. Like your clients don't want to know how the pizza's made. Like they just want to smell the pizza. Like they they want to enjoy the pizza. it's the seen pieces, not the unseen pieces, is what they want. And so when you're like, I kind of want to skip over talking about tech just because I feel like you can just go on YouTube and search like best mic or
Yeah.
whatever. I know for myself, getting a podcast set up, it was a very low investment in terms of, some decent equipment and that sort of a thing. But in terms of like a time investment, like how frequently are you doing these? What have you found to be a good cadence for show production?
I am starting once a month. Well, I started once a month. I am hoping to ramp that up to once a week or something like that. But I'm getting my process really ironed out. I'm making sure that I'm ready to go faster before I start trying to move faster. So I'm kind of giving myself a lens to look through. I'm teaching myself how to move through A, B, C, D, and then I'm willing to move through that process a little faster. I'm also giving myself to build my habit of where do I generate content from? How do I get it into the funnel? How do I format it into an episode that resonates with somebody? What I didn't want is to take the busy person, convince them to listen to my podcast, and then give them a bunch of garbage. And they're like, I'm never listening to this podcast again. What a waste of time. So I'm intentionally slow rolling it, hoping to eventually get to that faster pace to produce more content because I'm starting to build up that backlog of these are ideas I'm really confident in.
Yeah, that's great. I really like that. And then in terms of like team, like are you doing a lot of the editing and that sort of stuff yourself, or are you working with like an outside marketing company? Like how are you actually putting together the production side of things?
Yeah, so this is where I want to see how the pizza is made, right? I'm working with an outside company. So I come in, I record. I'm still coming up with the content. I never wanted to outsource that. I always wanted to be the person coming up with the content because I know my clients the best. I know my avatars the best. So I make the content, we record the episode. They do the editing, they do some of the social media creation, and then that all gets shared. Now, is that process going to be forever? I don't know. I hope that at one point I can bring it all in house. I hope that I learn how to make pizza to just continue destroying that metaphor. Sorry. I hope that I learn how to make the pizza and then I can really bring it in house and curate it to be something that is completely me.
I think people will be able to tell when we're recording this episode, like is a little before dinner time because of all the pizza metaphors that are happening. No, I
Yeah.
I love that because I think part of it too with people wanting to get into this medium, like the equipment investment is really low. You already have the content because you're talking to clients all day long. And if you have clients who are somewhat similar to each other, it's just that you are the content, right? Like you're not having to
Mhm.
come up with new things to talk to them, to talk to your audience about. And then in terms of production team, like I have an editor who works part-time for me, like, and then my assistant does a lot. And then, we've played around with different marketing and media companies in the past, and you don't have to overcomplicate it. I think it's more that focus of just wanting to get value out to a specific person that you're talking to, and then getting enough eyeballs and distribution on it that you're actually going to be able to get a benefit from it. That's really, really great. So, I guess one other thing that I think is important for people, you know, really committing to the consistency. And I really like what you said of the like start slow and then ramp up, build up a bit of a backlog, do the ideas that you're confident in. What are some like challenges or things that you found difficult when launching this that maybe you weren't expecting?
Difficult can be implementing the process, right? Becoming consistent with it. We can set out with the best of intentions, but we can still keep doing our previous habits. Our previous habits didn't include podcasting, content creation, things like that. So I had to give myself some grace of like, okay, well, I forgot to do part A, but I still need to do B. And so rearranging my schedule to get into the habit of making the podcast. That's one piece. And the other piece would be content creation. I'm very analytical. I'm definitely what you would call type A. I think a lot of advisors are going to fit into that same category. And so if I'm talking to my client Peyton about, oh, they're looking at buying a fifth wheel and they want to travel around the country, and then we work through the finances and realize this trailer they're looking at it's a bad deal. I don't want them to do that transaction. And we start talking about what would a good transaction look like. I was thinking, oh, now I could do or initially I was thinking I could do a podcast episode about how do you buy a fifth wheel? And it's like, no. Actually, let's just take that framework down, like get outside of my own boxes. And let's talk about frameworks for making large financial decisions, right? Because then there's things you're going to purchase, things you're going to put a down payment on, things you're going to finance. That's a broader topic. Now we're talking about fifth wheel trailers, we're talking about homes, we're talking about cars and boats and all kinds of things. And we're talking about how those decisions work together. So there was a little bit of a difficulty in realizing, okay, it's not a direct one-to-one application, but how do I make it one to many? How do I take this conversation with this client and turn it into something that is now one to many? And that's really where that framework mindset started to come from, was, okay, I'm teaching somebody how to look at purchasing something versus this is how you buy a fifth wheel trailer. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's actually, that's a really interesting point you make, because there's something I encountered earlier today of a business coach that I work with. And one of the pieces of advice that he had, and this is like totally unrelated, but similar, is that basically whenever you have like a specific situation that's going wrong, especially if you're like working with a team member or with a client or something like that, really the education that you want to be doing is around the principle, not like the particular infraction. Because if you focus on the particular infraction, like the next infraction that comes up, you're going to have to address that rather than just going back to the root of, hey, if this thing is I'm wondering if this was your advice for this, like for the fifth wheel, is this isn't going to be an asset that's producing a return for you. So you definitely cannot use debt to like, like you shouldn't be going into debt to do this, or whatever
Right.
the advice was. Right. And it's like, you go back to that framework of, this is how you need to think about this. And this applies to, like you said, the house, the car, we're going to buy a vacation home, or we're going to buy a new RV, or we're going to buy whatever. It's getting them to understand the principle underneath it so that they can be empowered to make the right choice, and that you're not having to get, the next time they want to buy something big, they can run through that framework a little bit in their own head before they go to, okay, now we're going to ask Mark about it.
Yeah, exactly.
So
And if you teach if you teach somebody how to think, then they can come back to you the next time and say, this is how I've thought about it. And you can then correct the framework. You can say, this is great. You can cut away anything that's excess. It starts to speed up your own meetings if you can take your brain as the financial planner and start to outsource it to your clients. I mean, that's what I'm finding. That's what I'm really enjoying. And the clients are walking away completely changed. Their life is forever on a different trajectory because the way that they think is different. And I
yeah.
think that's what a lot of advisors want. I just don't know if we all get there. But I found that podcasting helps me do that for my clients or for other people that aren't even my clients.
Yeah, that's really great. And the nice thing too, I imagine, with the podcasting for you, and this is something that I've deployed a little bit, is that when a client's encountering a situation and you're going to have a hard conversation with them, if you have a podcast that is that hard conversation, that's a way for them to get that without the direct conflict of you being like, hey, this is a bad idea, I don't think you should do it. It's like, listen to this 10-minute podcast of me about talking about this framework. Let's do a little meeting like next week after or like watch it right now. We'll do a meet, like, let me call you in 20 minutes. Do you have a minute, or whatever, however you structure it. Right. And then it's like, they've already gotten the bad news from the podcast instead of you
You
having
did it,
to.
but it wasn't you real
It
time.
wasn't you. It's like, I
Yeah.
have a friend who my cousin was thinking about buying this fifth wheel, and this is what
Yeah.
this is what I
It's
told
hard.
him.
When it comes to content creation, that's another way that I've been developing my content, is what am I saying repeatedly to my clients? When we step into this meeting in my process, meeting 3 of
Yeah.
4 or topic 2 of 6 or whatever it is, what am I repeating over and over and over again? And how can I systematize getting that information to people? And so sometimes it's, hey, listen to this podcast. Really, you need to listen to minutes, 7 through 14. But then I'm going to send them the whole episode. It's like, I address this and I want you to know this coming into the meeting, because you're taking an hour of time out of your busy workday. I don't want to burn up 20 of our 60 minutes telling you what I've already told a lot of other people. So it's a little bit
Yeah.
of a homework assignment, but it's, hey, listen to this and we'll have a more effective meeting afterwards because you listen to it. And then you get more people exposed to the podcast. You get more people habitually listening to the podcast. And then maybe they become more willing to share it with other people. It's like, oh yeah, I heard that in a podcast. Because I can say the exact same thing in a meeting, but if I'd say it in a meeting versus in a podcast, then the client might not realize, oh, Mark has a podcast about that. It's no. I was in that meeting with Mark and then he told me, but I'm trying to train people. Mark has a podcast about A, B, or C.
Yeah, that's really funny. And something that I noticed that happened to me like last month was it was a prospect who was coming into the firm, and I was telling them, all these technical things about their situation, and we were talking through the expensive planning that they were going to need, and they were like kind of on the fence or whatever. And then they found some content that I produced because I teach continuing education to other tax professionals, and they were watching some of that, and they came back to the meeting and they were like, you should send that to everybody. Like, you're so smart. Like, you get this. And I was like, I'm telling you the same thing directly to you that I was telling them, like, other than just using a bit more jargon because it was direct to tax professionals. And it's just funny. I think there's something about, for advisors who are listening to this, there is something about when someone engages a piece of content that is perceived as being a stage, just gets some kind of weird, different level of authority trust than you in a one-to-one interaction. I don't know what that is psychologically. I'm going to have a psychologist on the show in another couple episodes, and maybe I'll ask him what that's called. But there's definitely like a stage bias thing where when people meet you and they're, oh, I've been listening to your podcast, or when people come to me from content versus, maybe just like a referral or something, it's a very different, I can sense it. There's a different perception of, oh, you're an expert in this, and I'm going to take you really seriously, even though the quality of my expertise and your expertise as an advisor, like, it's the same whether I'm on a stage or I'm talking one-to-one to somebody. It's just their perception of it is very different with the way that they've come into the practice. So that's something I've observed from like podcasting and content production that really changes things for some reason. So for advisors who are interested in doing this and bringing it into their firms, one other thing that I think is worth a brief mention: compliance issues. Is that something that you have, like, you have to run it through a compliance team before you post it? Like, how's that experience been for you? Hey there, Catherine here. Thanks for listening to the conversation. Just wanted to explain a little more about what we do. So I'm a CPA here with Dominion. We're a tax firm that works specifically for financial advisors as they're growing and scaling their practices to help them avoid tax waste, make the right calls, and grow practices that they love. So if you're interested in saving more, you can DM me on LinkedIn with the word guide, and I'll send you over our guide for financial advisors to scale tax efficiently. All my top tips to unlock six-figure savings. Thanks, and keep enjoying the show.
I do have to run it through compliance, and maybe I'm out of the norm. I don't know. I enjoy running everything through compliance. It doesn't bother me. I don't get bent out of shape about it. The first time I sent in a podcast, they came back with disclaimers, and it was about 6 pages of disclaimers that they wanted me to make. I mean, it was almost doubling the length of my podcast. And so I pushed back, and I was like, guys, this is crazy. Nobody's going to listen to any of this, which is destroying the entire purpose of having disclaimers. And when I said that, they actually said, okay, that's a really good point. And so I went through and I actively worked with them, and I said, look, we're saying the same thing 4 different times. Can we consolidate that? Oh, yes, we can consolidate that. Okay. We're saying it in 9 sentences. I think we can say it in 1 single compound sentence. Can we say that? Yeah, we can say that. And what we got it down to was about 6 sentences that they wanted said. And I could still compound a few of those to get it down to 3 sentences that I could say shortly. And the main agreement was just, hey, if I say this at the end of every episode, and you don't have to worry because you know that these very broad, very high level, very blanket statements are here to cover what I'm saying. Are you guys okay with that? And after that point, once they saw I was willing to work with them, that we both worked hand in hand to come up with a solution, I think that really greased the wheels on compliance moving forward. Not that they're not paying attention, but that they understand I care. So compliance wise, it's more going back and forth and working together. I've discovered that to be okay. And then I'm just creating things that are within the confines of what my team will allow. And then the process becomes very simple because I understand, oh, that's very specific advice that I really only want to give to a client. And I agree, I don't want to be saying that to a bunch of people that don't understand this doesn't apply to them. So I keep it more broad, and then I invite people to the website or to set a meeting if they want more specific advice. And it works out really well.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think that compliance piece, not to push this on people who are listening, but I've heard people use that as a reason why not to jump into something like this. So maybe a good place for us to end this is, what words of encouragement do you have, and what kind of transformation has podcasting made in your practice for people who are like, okay, I'm interested in doing this, but maybe I'm on the fence about it. What words of encouragement do you have? And maybe any stories you can share of transformations that you've had through doing this?
I think running into somebody that you've never met who completely knows exactly what you do, and that conversation, your first interaction with somebody starts there, that is wild. That's absolutely wild. It only had to happen to me one time before I was completely hooked. And I realized this is insane. So, what happened there? Somebody saw me at church wearing my polo, which has my logo on it. He sourced information online, found my website, booked a meeting with me. We meet up to have coffee. Okay, so this is somebody who I didn't even know had interacted with me. By the time we sit down to have coffee, he has listened to the podcast, he's read the website, he's found my ebook, he has self-educated himself and is ready to just hear the final snippets from me. Like if we're building a cake, he wants to know where are the sprinkles going to be, not anything about where is the cake or what's in the cake. And that was so much faster versus having to sit down from scratch. And we could start building real rapport. Like you were saying, people are impressed of, oh, you have a podcast, you run a podcast, you record a podcast. People are so impressed by that. But to like peek behind the curtain, yes, I take a microphone and I record my voice and then I put it out on the internet. It's not that crazy, right?
Yeah.
It's also not that expensive. Get a good quality microphone, hold it in your hand, or use the free stand that it comes with. Get a camera. It's $100 for a microphone, $100 for a camera. Maybe you get a mixer in between. So maybe we're in the for like $300 total. And then, okay, do it for 6 months. You don't have to do it for the rest of your life. Do it for 6 months. Say you're going to do one episode every month. Come up with 6 ideas, and here, tell people who you are, why you do what you do, tell them who you do it for, tell them how you do it. And then that's 3 episodes right there. So think of 3 more ideas, maybe 3 strategies that fit in your niche, 6 episodes. If you get into 6 months, you're $300 in the hole and you've used 6 months to realize you don't like something. Like, what is stopping you from doing that? The other side is even if you do that, right? So fine. Even if you do that, you still have 6 repeatable audio sources that you can hand out for the rest of your life. Even if you decide, I hate podcasting, you still have it recorded. I don't know why somebody wouldn't do that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, it is I think a phenomenal education tool, and like just that strategy alone of, hey, maybe you're only going to do 6 episodes, do it like you said in that order. I encourage people listening, like pause, go back to what Mark just said and write it down, because there you go. There's your first 6 episodes.
Yeah.
And then you're good to go and you're started, and it makes a huge difference. So I want to thank you, Mark, for joining me on the show. For people who are interested in what you're doing, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
The best way to go about it, you can find me on LinkedIn if you want to reach out. We can do some messaging on LinkedIn. If you want to learn more about what I'm doing, you can go to my website. That's second-comma.com. I've got an ebook. Sometimes people want to learn about the ebook. My ebook is I'm not going to lie, it's really beautiful. I really enjoy it. I've spent a lot of effort getting that set up. You can download that. That's always free. If you want to learn about the podcast, that's called The Quiet Part. You can find it on Spotify. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, but it's also going to be on the website. So I try to consolidate everything there. But if you want to get into my world, that's the best way to get into it right there, is mainly through the website, second-comma.com.
Nice. That's great. Well, for people listening, I hope you spam Mark and go listen to his podcast and get some ideas for yourself. But as somebody who's recently into podcasting, I've found it just been phenomenal experience and way less work than I thought it would be. So I want to thank you again for joining me. And for those listening, I'd love to hear your feedback and thoughts. If you're an advisor and have something you've cracked in your practice and want to come on the show to talk about it, send me a DM. We're always looking for other advisors to come and tell their story about things that they feel like they've had a win that they wish every other advisor knew about. Because I just was talking to another advisor and he said, we really don't have to have any secrets in this field. Like Charles Schwab just did a report that there's going to be a 75,000 person shortfall in financial services coming up. And so there's more work than any of us can do. And the more we can help each other, the better. So for those listening, thanks again. This was the Financial Advisors Want to Know podcast. I'm Catherine Tindall, and we'll see you again next time.